Mother-in-law manipulator called me a trophy wife. A family nightmare story. After that conversation, I just hung up and blocked her number as her toxic behavior was starting to really bore me. It was the first serious red flag. Of course, Mark and I didn't break up, but it made me think about the kind of mother who raised him. Unfortunately, I couldn't completely cut off contact with my mother-in-law because I had to go to family events where Mark was invited and she was there too. My mother-in-law completely ignored me, pretending as if I didn't exist. For example, at Mark's cousin's birthday party, everyone greeted both of us, but she came running over to hug only Mark and started asking how his day was. If Mark tried to engage me in conversation, she looked away and quickly changed the subject. I started to notice a pattern. She always mentioned her health problems and told Mark that she was getting old and weak, implying that one day she would be gone and he should pay more attention to her. She didn't really have any health problems, though. She was perfectly fine. It was strange to see how she tried to manipulate her son to get his emotional attention. After years of a relationship, Mark proposed to me. He invited everyone to our engagement party. My parents and grandparents were very happy for us, but I can't say the same for my husband's parents. My mother-in-law came to the party with a sullen expression on her face, which got even darker when she saw the ring on my hand. She started telling Mark that it was disrespectful to buy me a ring bigger than the one she had once gotten from her husband. Phil tried to calm her down, asking her not to make a scene, but the mother-in-law continued to complain that her son was doing nothing good for her, but was doing everything for that poor girl. This made me angry, and I told her that if she didn't respect me, she should leave. My mother-in-law was shocked at what she heard, but I knew I wasn't going to let her ruin the happiest day of my life in front of my entire family. Phil led her out of the hall as she continued to yell something to Mark. Later, my mother-in-law called Mark to apologize, saying she was drunk, even though we all knew she'd barely had a glass of wine. However, since she apologized to both of us, we decided to forget about it. Then the wedding preparations began. My mother-in-law insisted on being included in the process of choosing the wedding dress, saying that she had always dreamed of it. It is important to note that by then, my patience with her was wearing thin, but since she was my fiancé's mother, I could not openly disrespect her, so I agreed to take her along. I warned my mother and sister-in-law to be prepared for her possible antics. As you might expect, my mother-in-law found a reason to pick on my dress. She said that sophisticated women don't wear so much lace and demanded that I choose a more traditional white dress. I refused, and my mother remarked that I was not her daughter and therefore she should keep her opinion to herself. My mother-in-law got angry and sat in the corner with her arms crossed like a hurt child. Throughout the fitting, she kept making nasty comments about the dresses I was choosing. In the end, I still found the perfect dress and paid for it. Then my mother-in-law came up to me and told me she was happy with my choice because this dress supposedly made my arms look fuller, and laughed. Upon hearing this, my mother, who had tried to remain calm until the last moment, couldn't stand it and harshly condemned her behavior. I was on the verge of tears because no one wants to hear something like that about their wedding dress, especially since I don't consider myself overweight. I didn't understand why she would say that. We let her know that she would have to get home on her own since I was giving everyone a ride that day. I knew that if I had put her in the car, she would have continued to say nasty things to me. My mother-in-law started to panic, stating that I couldn't just leave her, but that's exactly what I did. As I was driving my mom home, I got a call from Mark. He started asking how I could do that to his mother, and told me that she had called him in tears, accusing me of deliberately abandoning her. I told Mark that I would explain everything when I got home, but he kept rebuking me. That's when my mom, who could hear the conversation since the call was on speakerphone, intervened. She calmly explained to him that he had no idea how his mother had behaved all day. My mom went point by point and ended by asking him if he thought adults should behave like that. Mark was obviously embarrassed, for he didn't know the whole story. His mother-in-law, of course, did not tell him the whole truth. Later, when Mark got home, he apologized to me again. He said he just panicked, thinking his elderly mother was alone, so he reacted that way. I replied that I would never have done that if she hadn't acted horribly all day. Mark hugged me and said he would understand if I wanted to take her off the guest list for our wedding. At that moment, I really wanted that more than anything in the world, but I was afraid that Phil wouldn't be able to come, since his wife wouldn't let him if she wasn't invited. I couldn't allow my husband's parents to be absent from our wedding. It wouldn't be right. We decided to talk to Phil beforehand and let him know that if my mother in law started acting inappropriately, he would have to take her out. He understood and assured us that he knew exactly what we were going through. I felt sorry for poor Phil as he had to deal with her around the clock. At the wedding, my mother in law, to the surprise of everyone, behaved quite decently. However, she kept bragging to the guests about what a grand ceremony we had, as if she had paid something for it. In fact, all expenses were covered from our common wedding fund. However, given my husband's wealthy background and my mother in law's habit of embellishing reality, his family decided that perhaps she and Phil had paid for the wedding. However, during the wedding toast, Phil made it clear that they hadn't paid a penny and that it was all the result of our efforts. He also mentioned how proud he was to have such a smart daughter in law and that he couldn't imagine that his son would be able to find someone like me. Later, the guests congratulated us, wondering how we had managed the expenses on our own. My mother in law's face was getting more and more gloomy. She was obviously angry with Phil. During the traditional father daughter dance, I danced with my dad to the applause of the guests. Mark was about to take his shift when suddenly my mother in law ran up and said that she should be the one to dance with her baby first. Mark agreed, and they danced. Later during the holiday, my mother in law came up to me and congratulated me. I smiled politely, but suddenly I heard, "I was wrong, I guess your arms don't look so full in that dress." Then she just turned around and walked away as if nothing had happened. That comment really pissed me off, but I didn't want her barbs to ruin my beautiful day. A good time was had by all. We danced until late into the night, maybe even had a little too much to drink. The next day, I had several messages waiting for me from my mother in law. Imagine my shock when I read that she said I had embarrassed her throughout the wedding and that I should try harder if I was going to be a part of their family. I had a bit of a headache after the party, but I clearly remembered everything that happened at the wedding. So I decided to call my parents and ask them if I had done anything embarrassing. They assured me that I hadn't. I had behaved perfectly and everyone had a great time. Later, when Mark woke up, I showed him all the messages. He said I should just ignore them. That made me suspicious, so I asked him to explain what his mother in law had meant. Then Mark admitted that his mother came up to him throughout the night and told him that I was having too much fun, especially when I was dancing with my cousins. She called me intemperate and said that Mark needed to control me because I was now married. Mark told it in a joking manner, adding that he ignored her words and I should do the same. However, I was hurt by it. How could she imply something like that when I was just dancing with my relatives at my own wedding? She had no right to say such things about me. I wanted to deal with her right away, but Mark and I were going on our honeymoon, so I decided to postpone this conversation. The honeymoon was wonderful. We had a wonderful time. On the day of our return, my mother in law called me unexpectedly and in a sweet voice started asking me how everything had gone. It seemed strange because she hardly ever called me. I told her right away that I didn't like the way she'd talked about me to Mark on our wedding day. She quickly brushed it off, saying that she didn't mean anything bad by it. Then my mother in law started asking about the details of our vacation and kept insinuating whether we'd had enough alone time. I asked her to be blunt because I thought our honeymoon was none of her business. Then she said she just wanted to know if I was going to be a mother anytime soon. I felt uncomfortable, and there were two reasons for that. First, I had just gotten married, and not a week later, she was already expecting me to fulfill her dream of becoming a grandmother. Second, Mark and I didn't want kids yet. We had discussed this long before our relationship became serious, and our opinions hadn't changed since then. I remained silent, but my mother in law kept insisting that I needed to get pregnant as soon as possible because the biological clock was ticking, and now was the best age to have children. It was so embarrassing to listen to her arguments that I could hardly contain my irritation. But she went even further, saying that my husband and I should give up contraception. This was already completely unacceptable. I immediately stopped her and told her that I had no intention of continuing this conversation. When I told Mark about it, he was furious. He immediately called his mother to tell her what he thought of her, and frankly admitted that we weren't planning to have children yet. My mother in law's reaction was predictable. She started yelling and acting like we had done something terrible. Then she threatened that if Mark didn't give her a grandchild, she would leave him nothing in her will. To that, Mark only laughed and reminded her that she didn't have any assets since she and Phil had a prenup and she couldn't leave him anything anyway. Then my mother in law turned on me, blaming me for everything. She stated that my only duty as a wife was to bear a child to my husband, and I couldn't even manage that. She started using derogatory words, and it was very painful to hear. Mark tried to stop her, but she continued to insult me, claiming that we had ruined her lifelong dream and that if we didn't want kids, why we were married in the first place. Mark finally put a stop to it. He said firmly that he wouldn't let her talk about me like that anymore, and that he'd had enough of her after all her insults. The mother-in-law tried to justify herself, but Mark was adamant. He said that he was cutting off all contact with her and that she would no longer be welcome in our home or in our lives. He warned that if she showed up uninvited, we would call the police immediately and embarrass her in front of the neighbors. And knowing how much she valued her reputation, it was a real blow to her. We have since kept our word and have completely cut off communication with her. Phil tried to intervene, but after talking to Mark and learning the whole truth, he supported our decision. Over time, my parents and Phil met several times, but we never invited my mother-in-law again. Thankfully, she respected our boundaries and rules. Last December, I became pregnant unexpectedly. We were shocked as we hadn't planned it, but at the same time, we're in a good place in life and decided we could handle it. When everyone found out the news, we started to congratulate. My mother-in-law sent a bouquet of flowers and a letter of apology. In it, she wrote that she had thought about her behavior for a long time and had changed after several years of therapy. I didn't bother to answer her as I still doubted her change of heart. However, 2 months into my pregnancy, I lost the baby. It happened during the night. I froze in horror when I saw the blood. I woke Mark up crying, and he immediately took me to the hospital. There we were told the terrible news. It was incredibly hard. Even though we had not planned a pregnancy, we had grown to love the baby and were ready to do everything for him. I didn't know how to deal with this grief. Mark and my parents were there for me the whole time. Phil and Mark's family called to see how we were doing. They even stopped by to support us. My mom stayed with us for a few days because she knew I was having such a hard time that I didn't even want to get out of bed. Everything inside me hurt. I could cry for hours. Mark was my support, and step by step, I was getting better. Last week, Phil invited us to his and his wife's 25th wedding anniversary. It was a big event for the family, and everyone was invited. Mark and I didn't want to go, knowing that the topic of losing a child would inevitably come up, and for us, that was too painful. We didn't want to tell everyone about the worst day of our lives again. However, Phil begged us to come, saying he wanted to spend time with us and that we needed at least one night of distraction and relaxation. We grudgingly agreed. This was supposed to be the first meeting with my mother-in-law in years, but I was already in such a heavy emotional state that I had no energy left to even think about her and her antics. My mother-in-law was pleasantly surprised to see Mark at the party and immediately rushed to hug him. She was cold to me, but I didn't care. I found a place to sit down, leaving Mark to talk to his mother. Later, over dinner, everyone shared their good news and successes, as they usually do at family events. One of Mark's cousins mentioned that she was pregnant, and for me, it was like a stab in the heart. Everyone started to congratulate her as suddenly her mother-in-law got up to make a toast. Taking the microphone, she raised her glass and started talking about how happy she was to be with her loved ones and how she wouldn't want to change a thing. She then congratulated Mark's cousin on her pregnancy and started talking about how she brings a little lump of happiness into the world while others killing babies. She looked at me expressively and continued by saying she knew I had done something on purpose to the baby because miscarriage is impossible. Mark and I froze, unable to believe how cruel she could be. My mother-in-law kept loudly proclaiming that her son had gotten together with someone like me, and that she only let him marry me because she was hoping for grandchildren. But I, she said, proved incapable of even that. She then announced that I was just a trophy wife, and that she was looking forward to Mark finally divorcing me so no one else would see me on her next anniversary. After these words, she raised her glass and drank it down as if she had just made a victory speech. There was a sepulchral silence in the room until Mark asked his mother what the hell she was doing. An altercation broke out between them. My mother-in-law kept blaming me and Mark defended me as best he could, telling me how ridiculous and disgusting her behavior was. I was so humiliated and depressed that I burst into tears. It was too much for me. I couldn't cope with my emotions. My mother-in-law mockingly told me that I should stop acting out because no one would believe my pity story. Suddenly, quite unexpectedly, Phil, who until that moment had been sitting silently watching everything, got up and asked everyone to calm down. He said that he had something important to say to get the weight off his chest. Taking the microphone, he announced that he had been suffering for the past 25 years, and that today his eyes had finally opened. He had no intention of putting up with it any longer. He looked at his wife, who was frozen in bewilderment, and announced that there would be no next wedding anniversary because he no longer wanted to be married to her. Her face looked like she'd been hit with a brick. Phil continued by saying that he had stayed married to such a woman for so many years just for Mark's sake, so that he would have a good example in front of him, and not to destroy the family. However, as he watched his wife's behavior over the years and saw how she continued to hurt those around her, he realized that he was too old to tolerate it. The mother-in-law looked shocked. Phil didn't ask the guests to enjoy the food and announced that he was going out for a drink. He took off his jacket and tie and left the party. His mother-in-law started yelling for him to come back, but he ignored her. She then turned her anger on me, saying it was all my fault and ruined everything. But Mark told her it was all her fault, and he was glad his father was finally leaving her. Those words must have really hurt the mother-in-law because she fell silent and told everyone she was leaving too. Some of the guests came up to me to make sure I was okay as they were worried about me. Mark's cousin, who was pregnant, also came over and hugged me. After this incident, Phil moved in with us. He refused to come home, even though his mother-in-law continues to call him 100 times a day. He informed us that he was going to see a divorce lawyer. I feel terrible because I think that somehow this is really all my fault. Is it my fault that Phil is divorcing my husband's mother? Please post your honest opinion. So, I invite you to write in the comments right now. Is the author of this story at fault? And we'll move on to the update. Update 1. I didn't expect my post to get such a response when I published it. So many people have shared their stories of toxic mothers-in-law with me. It's just shocking. I can't understand how parents can behave like that. Also, please don't blame my husband. He stood up for me as much as he could. It's not easy for him to deal with an overbearing, controlling, and toxic mother. I was lucky enough to grow up in a loving family. He was not. He obviously grew up thinking this behavior was the norm and did everything he could to protect me. And lastly, I want to thank everyone who shared their miscarriage stories. I sincerely sympathize with every woman who has gone through this. It's hard for me to admit it, but I feel very guilty, because it was my duty to protect my child. I did everything I could, but I still feel guilty, even though it was in no way my fault. You are right. I need to see a counselor. I will also join forums where other moms share their experiences of this tragedy to get support and understanding. Update 2. Phil filed for divorce. Finally, it's been 2 months since my last update, and Phil has been staying with us the whole time. He's a great guest. Now I understand where my husband gets his sense of humor from. Phil also loves to cook, so sometimes when I get home from work, dinner is ready. My mother-in-law was very lucky to have him, and I don't see how she could afford to lose someone like him. When Phil and Mark came to hand her the divorce papers, she refused to even look at them. Mark told me that she screamed, saying that they had no right to suspend her, and that all the things she said about me were because she wanted the best for our family. Mark ignored her and helped Phil gather his things. The mother-in-law became angry and started throwing things on the floor, yelling and heel. At this point, Phil threatened to call the police as it was his house. Upon hearing this, she stopped talking because she realized she had nowhere to go. After the incident at the anniversary party, none of the guests contacted her except to express how horrible of a person she is. Everyone knew she lied about being a trophy wife because I have a good career and make a decent income. They also understood my pain over the loss of my child. Obviously, everyone took their anger out on the mother-in-law and let her know they didn't want to associate with such an unstable person. She no longer has any family or friends because of her antics. She tried to beg Phil to come back, but he obviously doesn't want to. My parents talked to my mother-in-law after they found out what she had said to me, and made it clear that they were going to sue her for public slander. My mom is not one to keep quiet, and she told my mother-in-law everything she thought about her. Knowing my parents, I'm sure they will keep their promises and take it to court if necessary. So I hope she will stay away from me. Update 3. Thank you to everyone who has supported me along the way. It's been 8 months since my last update, and I want to let you know that Phil is now a free man. He and his mother-in-law had a prenup, so she had no claim to anything. However, Phil agreed to give her all the money from their joint account and also leave her the car. She was furious and demanded that he give her the house as well. But Phil and his lawyer only laughed since Phil had owned the house before they were married. Mark had heard that his mother was now staying with one of his cousins while she looked for an affordable place to live. In my opinion, she has enough money to live comfortably and decently on her own. The mother-in-law mostly stays away from us, although from time to time we hear that she tries to deliver her side of the story to gain sympathy from someone. Oh well, let her do what she wants. As for us, we're happy. Mark and I are doing well. I did go to therapy, as I mentioned before, and it has helped me make new friends who totally understand me. Mark has also started individual sessions with a psychologist to deal with issues from his past. Things are going great in our careers too, and we are just grateful for everything we have. So be sure to post in the comments what you think of this story. I think similar situations are familiar to many or even all with toxic mothers-in-law or mothers-in-law. In this case, it's already an extreme degree of toxicity.